Um, Here we go today, Coffee with the Founder. I got my coffee cup today, Flash, 100-yard dash from one of our favorite family movies, Zootopia. And also, speaking of favorites, I got one of my favorite friends and colleagues joining me today, Deb Irving. Deb, we're doing these coffee talks with the founder just to give people a sense of the folks who come to the conference. A lot of times people see us and see you at the conference. They may get to say hello, sign a book, interact briefly, but we want to give people a sense of who people are that are part of the WPC family. And so I'm glad you have been able to join us. And I want to start by asking you, if I just met you in the lobby of a hotel or at a train station and I say, hey, I'm Eddie, who are you? What do you do? How would you introduce yourself to me, to the folks who are watching here today? Who is this person we have here with us today?
Well, given what I do, I love when people ask me that because I love to tell them what I do and then see where the conversation goes from there. So I would say I'm a racial justice educator and writer. And it never gets it does sometimes get a blank stare. And then usually if it's a blank stare, people will say, what is that? If I ran into you and I didn't know you yet, we would immediately get into a deep conversation. So people who understand what that is, one of the things I love about saying that's what I do is we immediately get into deep conversation about the work. The more challenging piece is how do I describe what I do to people who have never heard that term or can't even conceive of what it means. And what I say then is, I am a white woman who grew up in a really sheltered white world. And I only at the age of 48 started to learn how race and racism actually operate in the world and inside me. And I'm using my own story to help other people explore how racism has been and is operating in their lives. And then the conversation will go from there. But I think what I do, I know what I do is I learn in public. I'm modeling what it looks like to be someone who has a lot of privilege, class privilege, race privilege, sexual orientation privilege, Christian privilege. What does it mean to awaken out of the level of ignorance and apathy that can occur when I have so much privilege? Like, what would motivate me? Why do I care? And how do I work my way out of that apathy and ignorance? So I model what I learn.
Yeah, lots of good stuff. And I had like 4 or 5 questions come out of your introduction. I wanted to first ask you about racial justice, what that even means to you. So if you could just quickly, what comes up when I ask you about racial justice, what does that mean? When you say I'm a racial justice educator, I'm interested in what racial justice even means to you.
It actually took me a long time to come up with that term because when I got going, which was about 12 years ago, a lot of people were calling themselves anti-racists. And I'm not sure if I was uncomfortable with that term because it sounded too radical and racial justice sounded softer. What I told myself at the time, and I think what I still believe, is I'm always about naming what I'm searching for as opposed to what I'm against. Like, of course I'm anti-racist. I'm not just anti-racist. What I want is racial justice. So justice, to me, means when a system is just, when a relationship is just, there's a kind of balance. There's a kind of harmony. There's a give and a take. There's a fluidity. There's a lack of a power dynamic that harms. And so when I think of racial justice, it means tackling the racial injustice that has happened, that has left us with so much imbalance and lack of harmony and discord and divisiveness and harm. And so racial justice, of course, for me, it does include being anti-racist. and not just being that's not the end goal. For me, the end goal is being in a place as human beings where we're really able to connect deeply and use one another's different experiences and perspectives and strengths to grow ourselves individually and collectively. So it's about human potential for me.
Yeah, I'm wondering when you say clueless, 48 years old, all right? When you share that, I'm wondering, like, how does that happen? How can someone in a country like America grow up really, as you named it? I mean, essentially not really knowing about some of these terms, some of these issues that you now work on today. And do you feel like some of that is still happening to our population of people, that there's still kind of this oblivion in reference to the realities of what's really happening in our nation?
Oh, absolutely. It's still going on. That's the whole deal. That's the whole reason I do what I do. And because yes, it is possible still. The easiest way I think I would get into exploring that is because the United States master narrative is based on mythology. It's based on the idea that all humans are not created equally, that there's this sense of natural order, that, you know, this comes out of the Enlightenment, where an ant is below a lion, is below a human being, and even in the human being category, there's a hierarchy, and at the tippy top of that hierarchy are, landowning elite white men who appear to be cis and hetero, and they're Protestant and Anglo. Like, that's white supremacy. And so no one has to say that. I became deeply invested in that idea with nobody ever uttered that word. What happened for me, and what continues to happen, is that the master narrative tells us that the playing field is level in the United States. This is this amazing country where anybody can come, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you can make it. And, meritocracy is the fancy word for this. And if you don't, it's your own damn fault. So the reason people are able to remain unaware of how the systems in the United States really work is because they've been given an alternate narrative. They've been given a story that gives them their answers. And so before I started understanding just how deep and structural and systemic and evil white supremacy is, and how embedded it is in our country, I would explain, for instance, cramped and crowded, the ghetto, inner city housing. I would explain that as a bunch of people who, really probably weren't very smart. And of course, I'll state the obvious, these were Black folks, Black and brown folks. It just reaffirmed everything I'd ever been taught, that Black and brown folks were less ambitious, less intelligent, kind of had a natural tendency towards crime and not eating well. I mean, just all the stereotypes I were fed were reaffirmed for me by this idea that if they wanted a better life, they would have worked for it. So I had an alternate narrative. It's full of myths, but it explained everything for me in a way that kept me from going looking for truer answers.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about this recent news story of the young high school student, young white woman in the restroom, TikTok. They're recording this making of what they call the N-word. And they have these pieces of paper laid around the sink, and there's a cup of water. It's like a cake mix, and then they pick it up and it says, not very smart, and then they pour it in. And based on the amount they pour in is how much they believe that's true. So I was thinking about that as I asked you the question, thinking, well, man, I guess Deb is right. It's happening right here today. That makes me want to ask you then, all right, thinking about young people, the fact that this happened to you up to 48, this version of this is playing out on the news for us right here today. So if you were advising a parent or parents who are trying to stop this over the next 25 years, at what age do you begin the process to prevent what we saw happen with these high school kids that you're saying that also happened to you. What's your advice at the age you start? And if a parent is listening and willing to hear what you're saying, what would you say to them? Not only when you should start, but here's some things you could start with.
Well, I think we can't teach what we don't know. So I think about the way I raised my own children who are now in their 20s. And, by the way, I was on diversity committees the whole time my children were young. So it's very possible for someone to think they get it and yet be coming from a white savior place, which is not the same as doing anti-racism work or racial justice work. And so it's important for people to be able to, adults, the parents, to be able to identify where they are in understanding the issues themselves.
You're saying you're clueless on this journey of 48, but you're still serving in diversity roles.
Yes, that's the sky. There's no one more dangerous than the white progressive. I say that as a white progressive who thought, because you can't teach us anything. We think we know it all. It was only when I was forced to confront my own inner racism and my own lack of awareness about the world I was living in the form of a graduate school course. So not everyone's going to go take a graduate school course. That's why I wrote Waking Up White. It's meant to sort of do in 288 pages what that course did for me. So parents need to be able and willing to get into a place of humility and recognize I don't have all the answers and I'm going to learn with my child and I don't have to have the answers. So I think there is no age where you're not doing this work with your child. It just looks different at different ages. So it may be, what mother's group, or there's a sexist thing. What parent group do you choose to belong to with your kids? Are you gravitating towards all white people, or can you start right from the get-go? What playgrounds are you going to? Can you start to mix up visually, who is in your child's consciousness from the very beginning? There's so much you can do with the books you choose, with the images you choose around your house. And then I think one of the most important things, and this happens later, obviously, when the child starts talking, is kids will very naturally ask questions. I start my book off by capturing the story that when I was 5 years old, I asked my mother what happened to all the Indians. She gave me a terrible answer. I never asked another question for the rest of my life of her that had to do with race or racism or any kind of difference. So when a child asks a question, I think the most important thing for a parent to do, even if you don't know the answer, is honor the question. What a great question. And it's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that. I want to think about that. And I'll get back to you. And again, great question. Or if the kid is old enough, let's research this together. I don't know the answer. And I've noticed that too. So I think to really honor the questions and be willing to put yourself on a journey with your children. And again, always educating yourself as the adult. There are so many resources. On my website, there's a section under resources for parents, educators, and librarians. And that will bring you to sites that are probably kept even more current than mine. There's just no shortage of advice on this topic. Not only the books you can choose, but how to use those books with your kids, what kinds of conversations you can have. Because for many white people, we, right now, in 2020, who are parents, many of those white people, it's not so much they've been taught explicit racism, it's that they were taught to be colorblind, not see it, that talking about racism is rude. And so most of the parents I'm trying to reach are parents who are afraid of saying the wrong thing, to the point of avoiding it and becoming kind of paralyzed around it. And so, if you grow up being taught never to talk about something, you don't have any of the language, let alone the concept that those words are meant to capture. So it's a major educational process. And parents, don't wait till you're perfect at it to talk to your kids, because that'll never happen.
Yeah, I like that. I know you have some elementary education background, classroom experience. And it's too late to wake you up from those days. But let's just say we have some willing elementary teachers today. And they want to be teaching and talking with kids, particularly elementary age. So is there an age you should wait? I mean, is kindergarten ready for a conversation about waking up white or white supremacy or white privilege? Some of the terms that we often explore at the White Privilege Conference. Or is there a stage, a developmental process? I mean, what do you say to elementary educators, middle school educators, particularly in those most innocent and vulnerable years, when it comes to getting started by educating kids, young people around these terms?
Again, I think, so often people say, give me the tools. What are the tools? I need tools. Our colleague, Allie Michaels, talks about, the greatest tool you have in your toolbox is your own racial identity. So again, it's not the answer people want because it's not a quick fix. And yet, if I think that every teacher needs to develop their own racial identity so that they start to notice, I am being really hard on this young kid who's jumping up a lot, not staying seated, not concentrating on his work, and I'm not on that one. They're the same age. One is black or brown, one is white. To start to notice those differences. And I think also there's a real pull to education for white people who want to do good in the world. And unfortunately, do good in the world can often manifest as white savior. Like, I'm here to help and fix these poor little black and brown kids, without really understanding that what I'm doing is holding them to a lower standard because I see them as a them. So I think really checking ourselves as white people and understanding what it looks and feels like when we're holding children to a different standard, when we're not creating equitable. So for instance, I think the parent-teacher conference is one of the most important, and I don't even want to use the word conference, the parent-teacher relationship is one of the most important pieces of the educational system. And it is put in a box about this big in most schools. So I would say to educators, one of the first things you can do is really work on your parent-teacher relationship. It will probably come very easy with most white parents, and it will probably be a lot harder with parents of color. There's going to be a lot of mistrust there, and it might take you 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 50 times more work to create that relationship, and do it. Put in that work.
Yeah, that's good. Deb, I was wondering about family. I often say the toughest work we have to do is with the people we love the most. What's been your experience, not asking you to air out your family's laundry here, but just wondering what's your experience talking with family about whiteness, waking up white supremacy, particularly white families, white people around these topics. What's been your experience, yourself, your colleagues, your friends? Because sometimes I feel like the toughest work we have to do is with the people we love the most.
It is, absolutely. I'll tell you, when I envisioned what it would take for me to get the book out in the world, Waking Up White out in the world, which tells a lot of family stories. And I thought about my extended family, cousins, and also close friends, family friends. If I had made a list of the people who I thought would be like on board supporting me and the people who wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, there was not a lot of correlation with those lists in reality. So I think one of the things I've learned is to never sell someone short, never expect that they're not going to get it, and also not to expect the people you think will get it will. Because some of my fiercest resistance and the most exhausting emotional labor in the family friend circle have been people I thought would be on board like that.
Mm.
And so what I've learned is that when someone is interested, shows interest and openness, I really nurture that relationship. And so those are the relationships that have grown the most. And then I'm learning a lot about my own shortcomings in terms of how I interact with people who resist me and my message. And, you know, I can snap. I can get really angry with people who don't want to take this issue seriously. And I think I was sort of self-righteous about that for a while. But we really do have to meet people where they are. And one of the biggest things I've learned is that if I see someone engaged in something that I perceive as racism, I know is racism, and this clueless white friend or family member is engaging in it, that I have to bring a lot more skill to pointing it out to that person than I would in a workshop. Because in a workshop, everyone is signed up to be there, or they know what to expect. If we're out in a casual setting or in the middle of a holiday celebration or something, what I've learned is, instead of saying, hey, that's racist, is to say, are you open? Is to always extend some kind of an invitation. You know, are you open to hearing something I just observed?
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Yeah, I'm wondering about COVID-19. I want to first ask you how you're doing during this time. I mean, you, the family, I mean, how you're feeling, holding up during this COVID-19 quarantine time, but also what are you seeing around you in the larger community where you live, Cambridge, Boston? What's your sense of how the people are doing in reference to COVID-19 quarantine?
Well, you know, personally, like you, I travel. My lifestyle is a traveling lifestyle, and meeting in rooms of 250 people or more, pretty much, you know, that's what I do. So all of that has shut down. So I'm grounded, I'm home. And of course, everyone's home. And for me, that's been a pretty drastic change. And there's a part of me that loves it, you know. I heard you interview Jasiri X, and I would join him by saying, boy, you know, I'm a homebody and an introvert, and this is like filling a really a part of my being that needed some attention. And so on the one hand, I'm really loving it. On the other hand, I miss the work terribly, because the work pushes me and grows me all the time. And I miss that. I miss how alive I feel when I'm out in the world. I'm One of the experiences I'm having around COVID is the same experience I have every day around racism, and that is that I'm observing this from a really protected, privileged place. You know, we live in a comfortable home. We've got food that we can get on the table. Have a 22-year-old daughter who lives nearby who brings us our groceries. And this is the way I feel about racism every day. I'm engaged in the work, but I'm doing it from a place of such comfort. And so there's a real, there's a dissonance and a kind of guilty feeling I have all the time that makes me feel a little bit fraudulent, actually. So I have to manage that, because I know that being home is where I'm supposed to be, and so I think, you know, what writers do, and I do really consider myself a writer, even though I don't seem to be doing much of it these days, is writers are here to observe and reflect back. And so I'm spending a ton of time digesting news and seeing how various news sources and individuals are experiencing and sharing their experience and capturing, framing this moment, and thinking about how I'm going to be framing it as I integrate it into my work moving forward. And I think the thing that I have most on my mind is that there's a lot of, Ayanna Pressley and Ibram Kendi ex-Kendi, both of those people have pushed really hard to make sure that during COVID, we're capturing racial disparity information, the data. What I know about data is that it can be very, very dangerous if it isn't interpreted down to its root causes. So I'm thinking about how important it's going to be when we talk about, why we have disproportionate numbers of Black and brown people experiencing rates of infection, hospitalization, and death from COVID. Because if we don't unpack it fully, it's going to reaffirm old white supremacist beliefs that Black and brown people are biologically inferior. That's why they're dying at higher rates. So we need to be sure that we talk about these people are in frontline jobs, and even that you have to unpack. Black and brown people aren't in essential frontline jobs because there's not an equal ambition, a human ambition and desire to be doing all kinds of interesting things in the world, but because of systemic barriers that have kept people in that social role. People of color aren't living disproportionately in cramped and crowded urban neighborhoods by choice. It's because of housing and lending discrimination through the centuries that have resulted in that. So we have to be really, and even the comorbidities, when we talk about Black and brown people's health, the first place somebody who's still stuck in this myth-filled white supremacist master narrative, the first place they'll go is, well, that proves that white people are superior, like we're healthier, we don't get sick as often. So we just have to, when we are using data to help interpret what's happened in this moment, history is never going to have been more important, because we have to remind people what the historical roots are that have resulted in a disproportionate number of Black and brown people being in cramped and crowded housing, frontline essential worker jobs, and having multi-generational racial stress chronic conditions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you had me thinking about much of what I see when the numbers come out is about the most oppressed, the people on the bottom. There's not a lot demonstrating the lives of the privileged, the super privileged during this time.
Right.
I'm wondering and asking you if you can give some thought about even your book title, Waking Up White. Mm-hmm. Is COVID-19, this quarantine time, in your perspective, what's the impact maybe it's having on white people? I'm arguing that social distancing is the way the suburbs was designed. That we're gonna come out not 6 feet committed, we're gonna be even 60 feet committed, because social distancing is gonna be strengthened because we're asking the people living in the places that have been designed that way to practice it even more. I'm wondering, this is my perspective looking at it in reference to social distancing, white communities, the suburbs, but I don't know. I don't know. So I'm asking you, as a white person, I know it's hard to make a sweeping generalization, but knowing white people and having white people in your life, what's your sense of what this time is doing to white people? Is it inspiring waking up, or is it encouraging social distancing? So, for example, I know that the devastation, the disparities of people of color dying around COVID-19 is going to have a devastating impact, not only on the deaths, but the psychological impact of people of color. So I can somewhat speak to some of that a little bit, even from my own personal experience. But I'm wondering, no one's talking about the other side,
right?
The privileged side.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's your sense of what COVID-19 quarantine is doing to the psyche of white people? Is it inspiring waking up, or what's the other side of that? What's your sense, your thought?
Well, I mean, I think, so my world is skewed because the white people in my life are very much talking about racial disparity and using this as, and using this moment as a time to reconfigure our social systems. So I feel like I have a skewed perspective on that. One of the things I think is happening to white people in this moment, and there have been other pandemics, but people alive today haven't experienced these pandemics. For the first time in our white lives, people in my white circles are afraid to go out of our houses. We're afraid to send our children out of our houses. And we feel like our government doesn't give a damn. At least our federal government doesn't give a damn. And I think that sounds awfully familiar, pretty close to what I've heard people of color say has been a forever experience in the United States. Not feeling safe in the world and not feeling like your government gives a shit about whether you feel safe in the world. And so I feel like it's actually a really good chance to start to educate white people that this is what it feels like to have somebody, to have a government who's not responding to you and your concerns. I will say what's been remarkable to me is, again, I'm only speaking from my experience and my circle of friends. I am in Cambridge, where we have a mayor, a woman of color, a young woman of color, who is doing such an extraordinary job raising money for the Mayor's Relief Fund. She sends daily emails. They're personal. They're from her. You can hear it's her voice. It's her stories. We are so well organized in Cambridge. And in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, Republican governor, I think he's doing, and again, this is white me, from my perspective, he is at least giving us daily information. And he's speaking about his experience. He's taking it seriously. He's connecting with other governors in kind of this Eastern corridor. And so I'm getting a real taste of how important local government is. And I think that that's going to be a huge change. And if a bunch of white people are beginning to feel more connected to their personal, their local governments, I think it gives us more leverage with our local governments to create racial change, racial justice at the local level, which is, really where any big movement begins, is locally. And so I'm looking forward to opportunities at my city and state level to really, catch our breath whenever that is. I don't know what that's going to look like. Yeah. Enough to say, as we move forward, we've had to create some social systems here that didn't exist before. And can we talk about what it would look like to not remove those social systems, to just embed them? So that's what's on my mind as a white person.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. I mean, it's a broad question. I'm just, as you watch the news, as you stay connected social media wise. I mean, I think there are different kinds of experiences for different groups of people, and I appreciate you giving some insight just based on some of your identifiers. Not to say that's everybody, but it's just, right. I mean, I think it's something I've been asking folks on the show. I was also going to ask you about another tough question that I'm sure you've heard a lot about, responded to over your career: white people making money off diversity work. What's your sense of that? How are you responding to the criticism or the critiques that may come your way when people are saying white people shouldn't be making money doing diversity work?
Yeah, that idea actually came to me about 2 years before the book came out. It was a 4-year writing and research process for me, and I stopped writing. I said, I'm not going to put a book out in the world. I hadn't even thought of that. And so I packed the book project away and decided not to enter this field, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it without any, I'd have to go back to work if I couldn't make money doing this. And then I started to get poked and prodded by people of color who had helped me along the way in those first 2 years to think more deeply about it and not just give up, not make it an either or, but bring some more nuance to it. And so that's what I do. I think the criticism is really important to listen to, and I don't think there's one answer. I think I have to evaluate again and again and again. So a couple ways I think about it is, first of all, I don't think of what I do as diversity work, because diversity is just, we've talked about this. It's such a limited idea. I feel like what I'm doing is human systems work, and I think that injustice is the quickest way into understanding how human systems get out of whack, whether that's an interpersonal system, an interpersonal system, an institutional system, or a national or global system. And so, I think about my MBA training, organizational design, organizational behavior, organizational systems. So I feel like none of us who do this are just doing diversity work. We're bringing our experiences as educators, as organizational systems thinker, which I identify much more as that than an elementary school educator, though I have some of that experience. So I think to say to people, you can't make any money ever if you bring up this topic, doesn't make sense. I do, and I also think it's really important that I leverage my privilege to walk my talk. So what I do personally is I share money, the profits from the book, 50% of those profits I distribute to organizations like yours. And because I feel like, one of the cornerstones of white supremacy is this rugged individualism, and doing this work in movement, in collaboratively. I have a handful of organizations who helped me figure out how to think about and do this work. And it feels so good to turn around and say, thank you for what you did for me. And let me give you money now so you can do what you did for me for more people. So I think about it's not really wealth redistribution. I don't have enough wealth to distribute, but I can certainly invest in the organizations that invested in me. And that's where I've come down. That feels really full circle-ish, and it feels like a clean way to do it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, it's a question that I always have felt you've been willing to receive, willing to respond. And I mean, people are going to interpret and dissect that response in very different ways. But the fact that it's on your mind, in your heart, and in your actions, I think that's what I appreciate. And so
another thing that came up really early that's interesting to note is, before I got much experience public speaking, I didn't feel like I could charge because I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I started to charge $250 for a talk. And I had a couple people of color come to me and say, you know what, you're undercutting me. If you charge that, no one's going to hire me. And I hadn't thought of that. So I think I've identified 15 different elements that I have to consider when I think about pricing. So, what if someday I was able to charge $25,000 for a keynote speech? Should I say, no, I'm only going to charge, $1,000, because that would be wrong. Well, what about that $24,000 that I could be getting from a corporation and giving to the Privilege Institute? Or some other organizations and individuals who could really take that money and, fly with it in the movement. So it's not an either or, it's a complex web of considerations to think through.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I want to encourage you to keep pushing and challenging other white consultants, speakers to do some of that as well, because I feel like speaking for myself as a speaker, as a consultant, that that question is always something I think about and want to have some discussions about with white friends and colleagues, and um, to know that there's some folks out there grappling with that, putting some things into action around that is really helpful. Because I don't know if there's a right answer. I don't know. Everybody's going to receive it very differently. But thank you for that. As we get ready to close out, what's on the horizon? What are you going to be when you grow up, Deb Irving? What's in the next 10 years? What do you got going? What are you thinking about? Anything you got cooking, so to speak, as you look at the next 10 years of your work?
Yeah, well, I want to get back to doing what I was doing. I hope that'll happen, and I'm not 100% sure it will. And I'll certainly end up figuring out, how to do Zoom presentations and webinars. But man, I love being with people. I love learning in these group settings. I love seeing how this institution or that town is grappling with white supremacy and being in that mix with them. So I hope I get back to that. I'm also really wanting to get out another book. And this one is really focusing, if you look at Waking Up White, there's one chapter in there called The White Culture. And that really fascinates me, because when I think about the way our systems, again, I'm a systems organizational design kind of a thinker, the more I understand how much whiteness is embedded in our systems and structures, the more eager I am to help other people see that and make all the tweaks. A lot of times people talk about a massive dismantling, and I think actually for me, it's beginning to feel much more realistic and actually impactful to start to tweak the system in smaller moments. So for example, whiteness, classic whiteness is a person at the top or small group of people at the top making decisions for everybody else. It's pretty easy for an institution to quickly get systems in place that capture the perspectives and the opinions and the experiences from a broad number of people in the organization. We know corporations do this all the time when they survey their customers. The customer's always right. That's actually a saying in corporate America. So then why can't the employees always be right? So where can we find whiteness living in systems, and how can we create other systems and structures and policies and procedures that bring greater humanity into the organization, into the broader culture? So I don't think we can do that until we intimately understand how whiteness operates inside of us, between us, in our institutions, and in our broader ideology. And so the book I want to write is making that really personal so that people can start to spot it in themselves.
Yeah.
And because I'll say, the more, like, I've watched you do your own work. When we're working together in a workshop setting, you model for other people what your struggles have been in interrogating the ways whiteness has formed some of your own thinking, and how you're unearthing that and getting that out there and kind of reclaiming your own humanity. And I feel like, I've been reading How to Be an Anti-Racist lately, and even Max Kendi, his own journey to understand what white supremacy did to him and his own thinking about himself and the world. Once people are able to make that connection and get involved in this work because their lives depend on it. I mean, my life depends on understanding whiteness. I need to be liberated as much as anyone needs to be liberated from this system. And so that's really my goal, is to help more and more, or model for more and more people. Help is sort of that savior language, to model for more and more people what it has looked and felt like for me to interrogate whiteness in myself and around me in really deep ways that allow me to just reclaim my humanity and really grow individually and in relationship and in larger collectives.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, we appreciate you joining us. We want to end on a light note. We've been collecting a list of what to watch. So is there anything you're watching, you're streaming that you could add to our list that either taught you something, teaching you something, or that just allows you to escape? What's on your you need to see this list?
Oh, well, Little Fires Everywhere. I don't know what I'm going to do when it ends. I love the book. I love the series. It's so good. I've been watching Sex Education. Have you seen that?
No.
Oh my God. Set in England. It is about a group of high school kids. It is so good. That's been, my husband and I have been watching that and going back and forth between that and Babylon Berlin. You heard of Babylon Berlin?
Mm-mm.
It's, espionage, intrigue. It has nothing to do, well, of course it has everything to do with power. It reminds me a little bit of when I started watching, what was that thing? I know you watched it too with Kevin Spacey, the White House.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
I can't remember the name of that. House of Cards. House of Cards.
House of Cards, yes.
I remember, watching House of Cards and thinking, holy God, like the evil plots people are coming up with. That's what I feel when I watch Babylon Berlin.
Gotcha.
It's just like the lengths power will go to protect itself.
Yeah.
There's that, and those have been what I've been watching, and I've just been devouring news. African American Policy Forum has these great webinars. Under the Lights, I think is the name of it, or Under the Black Light. It is so good. Yeah. So I will say, I've been trying desperately to understand COVID as a germ, as a virus, and how it's impacting our society, how, what the racial lens on that is. And I'm watching so many people really being voracious like I am in consuming and understanding this virus. And I wish everybody would tackle racism the same way. Read every single day, try so hard to understand how it works, because it's more deadly than COVID. Yeah. And yet some people like to say it doesn't even exist.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end than that way. And we want to appreciate you always for your support for the conference, the Institute, but also myself. It's been just a journey to be a friend, a colleague, a family member. So I appreciate you, sis. Sending you love, give love to the family. And I'll look forward to being able to hug you for real, but for now, I'll send you a little Wakanda virtual hug.
Okay, right back at you. Love you, Dr. Moore.
Peace. Thank you.
Bye-bye.